Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Planning to Upgrade to SharePoint 2010 web seminar. Please make sure your computer speakers are turned up. There are a limited number of telephone audio lines. We prefer that the majority of our audience listen and view the program via web streaming. You should only have an audio line connected if you are having issues hearing the program via your computer speakers. Today's call is being recorded. At this point, I would like to turn the program over to Mr. Joel Olson, SharePoint Architect at Quest Software.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. We've got a great attendance today. I think we're going to have a really fun webcast for everybody. But first off, let me clear up a few things. Today we're talking about the planning, the preparation for SharePoint 2010, and it's what we know today. There's not going to be any new NDA details that are going to be revealed here. There's no disclosure. This is really about helping you so that you're ready when the bits come. And we're all excited about things that are happening in the SharePoint world. So let me first start off with a little intro. I'm Joel Olson. SharePoint Joel is my blog. I've been working with SharePoint for over 8 years. Worked at Microsoft in IT. You could even say I'm the first SharePoint admin because I was working with the product team back in 2000, and there was an under-the-desk deployment in the product team, and we helped move it into the data center and start off the real first production environment inside of Microsoft. And then from IT, I moved into the SharePoint product team doing product management and joined up with Quest in November and have been working with them on product strategy and architecture and evangelism. Now, really what we're talking about today is how can we get ready for SharePoint 2010. And with all the things that have been revealed with tools that are in SharePoint Service Pack 2, and especially this pre-upgrade checker, I can't overemphasize enough how powerful and how important that tool is, and we're going to really drill into that one. So it's all about preparing your environment. There's some action items around making copies of your environment in a Hyper-V. We'll drill in a little bit about that, but I wanted to help you understand that if you wait until the bits are available to get ready, you're going to be behind. You know, if you wait until RTM to even start to play with it, it's going to take you a while to ramp up because there are system requirements. There's some checks you need to do, and the more you can do today, the better prepared you're going to be. Now, there's a few different poll questions in here, and these poll questions are available for everyone. So as soon as we jump off of this poll question, you're actually going to be able to see the results of this. And this is, just for everybody's information. It's kind of some interesting results. This question: when do you plan to upgrade to SharePoint 2010? And you can basically choose your answer right on this. Right, it's interactive. You can actually plug in your answer, and then we can see the results. So the first option is within 3 months of its release, 3 to 12 months after its release, a year or more after release, or no current plans. And I would say you can even guess at this. This is a question that you probably don't know exactly what you plan to do, but you probably had adoption in the past. So feel free to choose that answer. All right. Let's see what people chose. Looks like a lot of people, the most popular one is 3 to 12 months after its release. That's really exciting, and actually, surprisingly as well, even nearly 20% within the first 3 months. All right, so there's going to be a couple more questions as we move through this. Actually, there's the results. For those of you who didn't see them, I was looking at them on my side. All right. Now, you've all seen this if you follow the SharePoint team blog. Those of you who don't follow the SharePoint team blog, you may not have seen the SharePoint Server 2010 requires 64-bit Windows Server 2008, either the release version or R2. R2 just recently came out. Now, what does that mean? essentially that means you need the 64-bit hardware and you need the 64-bit operating system of Windows Server 2008. If you're running Windows Server 2003, either 32-bit or 64-bit, you need to upgrade. Essentially, these have been around for a little over a year, but it's important that you are planning these types of things today. Now, the other one that has kind of had less press around it is the 64-bit requirements around SQL Server. It requires 64-bit SQL Server 2005 or SQL Server 2008 64-bit. So what does that mean? That means that if you're using SQL Server 7.0 or 2000, it's not supported. You need to be on 64-bit 2005 or 2008, and you can get more details on the blog that's linked there. And you will have access to the slides after the presentation, so don't worry about that. Client. What about the client? Well, there's been some things revealed that are really exciting as well around getting your clients ready. So even if you're not the person who does, manages desktops, now's a really good time to start having conversations around the desktop and start having conversations around browser standards. In the past, it's been very Internet Explorer focused, but let me read a quote from the blog. A standards-based browser such as Internet Explorer 7 or Internet Explorer 8 or Firefox 3 will be required to author content. So you got that? Basically, IE 7 or greater or Firefox 3 and higher. So we're looking at new support for Firefox as a Tier 1 standards-based browser for authoring. Pretty exciting to be able to see that kind of adoption. As well, you'll see better support for Safari, but really the one that you really need to nail into your head is this one that says no support for IE6. I can hear the developers right now screaming in the background saying, woohoo, that's great. But as well, that means those of you who don't have standards in your company on browsers, or those of you who've just kind of been limping along with your support for Internet Explorer 6, now's a really good time to ensure that your users have upgraded desktops and are ready when SharePoint Server comes out, especially those who are authoring. And this, it really is almost, it's a direct quote, the no support for IE6. So while there may be a degraded experience for the reading, the browsing experience, you really want to make sure everybody is, at least from an Internet Explorer standpoint, on 7.0 or greater. Now, as well, I kind of see this as there's no better time, really, to look at your desktop standards. Windows 7 just barely came out, and now it's a really good time to say, hey, now that we're going to have a new desktop, what do we want to do? Do we want to roll this out with Office 2007? Or really, since you're syncing these things up, how can we really look at our plans for Office 2010 and these new Office web applications? I can't drill in on those, but the more we start to understand the enhancements that come in the client with Office 2010, I think there's some really exciting scenarios, especially when with what's going to be coming at the SharePoint conference. Really exciting things around the client, and I don't think that. Obviously, it's not something that's required, but it's going to be, again, kind of these good, better, best types of things, and we want the best experience for our authors and our users. Ooh, what about Macs and non-PCs? Really exciting stuff as well. Service Pack 2 of Office 2008 for Macintosh has some new SharePoint integration for editing. So if you've got some Macs that you've been looking at how can we have a better SharePoint experience for those users, just released that Office 2008 Service Pack 2 for the Macintosh. Firefox support for non-PC systems. That's great too. Having this much richer experience on a broader set of clients and desktops. So more on that as well with that press pass around the Office release of Office 2008 SP2 for Mac. Ooh, developers. What about our developers? That 64-bit requirement. What are we going to do? Right? Well, and a lot of people, they just barely rolled out, or they're in their plans to roll out Visual Studio 2008. what are your plans for 2010, for Visual Studio 2010? I was following the tweet stream around Mix and saw a number of little tweets. Here's a quote of a tweet where someone says, Visual Studio 2010 will have full debugging experience for SharePoint. Exciting stuff. Those of you who are at Mix or those of you who are at PDC who've had a chance to look at Visual Studio or Visual Studio, the team system, a lot of exciting things around much better support for SharePoint 2010, more integrated experience. And so there's all that exciting stuff happening. But as well, when you start looking at the developer and you start looking at their desktop, are they working today in a remote environment, working off of some server, or are they working local? Whether it's an installation of the server or whether they're using that bamboo hack thing where you can install it on Vista. How do we make sure that our developers have hardware that supports 64-bit so that if they're doing local development, then they can have a much better experience, and they'll actually be able to run it locally. That's the real thing where it's 64-bit mandatory. So if you're looking at a local experience, then we want to make sure our developers, with all these exciting things coming out, how they can support that. Next question. And this one really kind of helps all of us understand who we've got on the phone in terms of enterprises and maturity of environments. What is the size of your SharePoint environment? 0 to 50 gigs, 50 to 250 gigs, 250 to a terabyte, or over a terabyte. And I know that more and more we're seeing customers with over a terabyte of information, even in some of these medium-sized organizations. And the last one is, based on your role, you may not even know. If you've got a good idea, feel free to choose one of those. But let's see how people responded to that question. Okay, so it looks like we got a pretty good strata with most environments having between 50 and 250 gigs. But still, the surprising one for most of you may be that over 1 terabyte is more than 20%. Pretty interesting, huh? That there's that many large SharePoint environments. All right, getting back to things. What can we do with our data today? What can we do to optimize our information so that when upgrade comes or when it's time to upgrade, we're in a much better position? So I've kind of bucketed things. Large lists. First off, we'll look at this pre-upgrade check, and one of the things it flags is lists that are over 5,000. This is an area where when you run that pre-upgrade check, it's going to identify those lists. But as well, when you start to look at these types of things today, we can look at how can we limit our item maximum so that when we get a view returning results, it's returning less than 5,000. But ultimately, we want it to return something like in the number of 100 or less than 1,000 for a more optimum experience. Do we have indexed columns for our filters? Do we have indexed columns for our views that they're based on? But really optimizing our queries. If you've seen the sneak peek videos, there's actually a little bit on large lists in there. I highly recommend everybody look at those sneak peek videos. Great resource. Gives you a little bit of insight of what's going on, but there is definitely some information around large lists in there. Optimize your databases and your site structure. If you've got really large databases over 100 gigs, now's a really good opportunity to split up those databases so that upgrade is going to be more smooth. So it's splitting your databases, breaking up really large site collections, archiving unused needed site collections. Really, you don't want all this junk that's going to slow you down at upgrade. You want to have your data structured in a way so it's smooth, and then when people get to that new environment, ultimately they're going to be much happier because things are clean and much more set up to take advantage of the new features and so on. As well, with the pre-upgrade check, you'll notice that there's some information around features and site definitions and templates and so on. And if there's some that are not even hardly used, it's a good time to do cleanup. And we'll talk more about cleanup in a minute. So this is kind of a high-level checklist, essentially. But in this kind of summary of preparing, it's preparing your servers, it's preparing your clients, both PC and non-PC, even considering mobile views and mobile scenarios for SharePoint in the future. How can we sync up and have these conversations with the people in our organization? And if it is the same person, now's a really good time to say, okay, we're going to roll out the server, then we're going to visit our desktops, or, hey, we've already been talking about Windows 7 and our rollout of that. How does that sync up with what we want to do with SharePoint so that we're ready? You're not, unless you're magical, you're probably not going to do your server and your client at the same time. Obviously, we do want to get the users up and having the best experience, but it's a tough thing to be rolling these things out, and how many things do we want to hit the users with at once? That's definitely something you're going to have to work out in your environment. But going back to this preparing, this kind of a checklist thing, documenting our environment, revisiting the farm, the structure of our topology, especially the global deployments and so on. And as you get more information, they'll make more sense as well. Reviewing hardware as it gets end of life, planning for upgrade, disk capacity. The disk capacity is really important. When you start looking at, we're going to be upgrading, guess what? There's going to be some overhead associated with that. Memory, with the new system requirements, as they get revealed, how do we revisit our hardware that we've got? We already know it's going to be 64-bit, and we know that upgrade is going to require more disk. Are we going to use existing hardware, or are we going to plan for new hardware? That's really the ultimate question. Identifying customizations. Now, this is something we'll be drilling into much further as we go on in the presentation, but the customizations is something you need to get a handle on. Especially if you're making a copy of your environment, you need to know exactly what your dependencies are as you mirror it. And I would say it really applies to everyone. Everyone should plan on making a copy of their environment so that when the bits are available, you can run that on that environment. And we'll talk about that as well. Your upgrade strategy, obviously there's some dependencies on understanding how that might work. The topology, the services, upgrade and order, operational steps, downtime. Downtime is definitely something you can be talking to your business about. Now that you kind of have a high-level idea of what you want to do, coming up with plans around mitigation and kind of limiting the downtime. You know that in Service Pack 2, the read-only database options became available, where there's actually a user experience around read-only. That's pretty cool. Communication plans, working with your project managers, and those of you who are project managers, coming up with these training plans and communication plans, and how the servers are changing, how the clients are changing, and this huge wave of what is 2010, from the developer to the IT, how all these things kind of roll together, and how we get everybody up and using them and taking advantage of the real feature set. Now, this is the last question, and this question is, do you plan to move to SharePoint Server in SharePoint 2010? And for those of you who wonder, what the difference between Windows SharePoint Services or WSS versus the paid version. So essentially this is, if you're already using SharePoint Server, then the first option is we already have the portal. We already have SharePoint Server. We already have SPS or MOS. Second one is yes, we do plan to from WSS. And then the third option is no, we're planning on using the next version of Windows SharePoint Services as well. And that last one is, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not sure. But ultimately, again, this is, you're trying to basically flesh out the licensing question of, are you going to be using the full-blown, full-featured SharePoint server? responded to that? Looks like on this call that MOS, or SharePoint Server, really is what people have today. And I would say this actually kind of agrees with what I find is those people who are most passionate are those who are using SharePoint Server. And there is a small percentage of people that have chosen the other options, but definitely an overwhelming response of already taking advantage of MOS, loving MOS, good stuff. Okay, identifying customizations. Really, this is one where whether you're planning to upgrade today, planning your today to upgrade your environment in the future or not, it's really, really important for you to keep track of your customizations. This is change management at its core. It's really important for you to understand what has changed on your environment, from binaries to things that have been thrown in the GAC, the global assembly cache, things that have been thrown into the installation directory, the home directory of the website, solutions, admin programs, third-party applications. Don't forget things like timer jobs, event receivers, HTTP handlers, IS customizations. Now, why am I saying all these things? Why is it important for you to understand these customizations? First off, despite anything happening with upgrade, if you have a failure in your environment and you need to create a new configuration database, how much have you documented so that you know how to rebuild your farm? That's definitely a key question. But as well, when you're trying to upgrade, you're going to be making a copy of your environment, just so you can validate it, especially. But you're going to really need to know what are the dependencies, and the pre-upgrade check helps us identify them. But what if it doesn't find everything? How are you keeping track of what's changing in your environment? Such as, those IS customizations, pre-upgrade scan doesn't know about those, and it may not even know about your custom timer jobs. So it's important for you to identify these customizations, and I'll give you some suggestions on how to do that. But as well, those of you who are running third parties, especially, we've got people like Quest on, people that, a lot of our customers, right, who are wondering, how's Quest planning on supporting upgrade and those types of things? Well, we're working on it, and we're very involved with Microsoft and that kind of thing. But it's important for you to revisit your maintenance agreements and work with that third party whose products you have on your environment for upgrade guidance. And I say this because I remember in the previous version there were people who, when you upgraded your environment, those applications had some challenges, and those third parties had guidance, or they said, some of them would say, please wait until we have some answers for you. But I think you find, especially with this version, a lot of them are, running through it as you're running through it, they're running through it as well. So they're taking advantage of these betas and so on as well. But I would say keep the lines open, and there's a lot of guidance that they're going to be planning as well. Tools to identify customizations. You may have used some of these in the past. Some of them you may have not heard of. WinDiff. This is one of my friends. It's definitely in my toolbox, especially with any SharePoint environment, trying to troubleshoot, what customizations and what's causing problems. WinDiff is something I'll use both to compare two of my front ends to see if both of them have the same things installed on both web front ends. But as well, I use WinDiff to compare against a brand new install with one that's been running for a while. That way I can identify any pages that have been added, any features and solutions and things like that have been added to the file system. And when I say solutions, it's probably not, it's probably post-installation of the solution. It'll also kind of help you identify basically what's on the file system. But you need to know what directories to run that in, and whether it's installation directory or the home directory, being able to identify differences in the web config files and so on. Beyond Compare. What's Beyond Compare? This one is a tool that you can run, it's kind of like a profile for the file system. You can run this beyond compare, and then when you install an application, it'll show you what it does. It'll show you the files and so on that were added when it was installed. SP-Diag, there's this admin toolkit that the SharePoint team has put together, and SP-Diag is a nice little tree view of areas in your environment. So it kind of helps you identify large lists as is one scenario. But as well, it can help you kind of give you an overview of your environment. I really like that tool. Pre-upgrade check, we'll definitely drill into that one more. And I think that right now, that one has a lot to do in terms of being able to show you what's going on with your environment. As well, our friend Mike Watson, he's working on a deployment advisor. It's still in the early, or hasn't yet been publicly released yet, but we hope to hear more from him on that one as we get closer to upgrade. And that one is definitely designed around being able to help you identify customizations and help you identify what's changed and so on. We'll definitely hope to hear more from him in the near future. Cleanup. Cleaning up orphan sites, lists, objects, removing old and stale unused sites and site collections. The cleanup is really around helping you prepare your environment today so that when upgrade happens, you don't have failures around orphan sites and locked sites and different things like that, where if you remove these things, it's going to be a much cleaner upgrade. And as well, the more you can clean these things up today, it's actually going to result in better search results as you move down the road as well. Variations, there's a variation fix tool in Service Pack 2 that just came out. Removing missing and unused features. This is one where when you're running the pre-upgrade check, it can help you identify problems with your environment. Finalizing upgrade, if you've been running an upgrade from the previous version, and pre-upgrade check will actually identify that you haven't finalized your upgrade. Cleaning up legacy upgrade issues like customizations and ghosting. And ways you can address that is through the reset to site definition. There's a couple of ways to do that. One through the site settings menu, which will reset all pages in the site collection, or within SharePoint Designer, you can reset single pages. Now, when you step back from this whole thing and you say, we want to look at 2010, we want to take advantage of the features it has, and we want to take advantage of the services and all this goodness we've seen in the overview of the sneak peek, and all the things that we're hearing at the SharePoint conference. Well, it's the best time, really, ultimately, to say, how do we want to optimize what we're doing in our service offering? And if you don't know what I mean by service offering, in a lot of my governance presentations and in the successful deployment, I say you need to start looking at SharePoint as a service offering. You need to look at SharePoint from that standpoint of it is an offering, and this is what our standard offering is, that we have widget A, B, and C. We offer site collections for this. We offer web applications for our departments, and so on. So there's a service offering. But ultimately, today you may be running collaboration, but you want to take advantage of some new feature set. And that's really what I'm saying is now is a good time to revisit that and say, how are we going to expand our service? How are we going to get closer to the roadmap of what we want to do with what our company is trying to accomplish with SharePoint? And as you're doing so, are you planning a sandbox for IT? Are you planning a pilot environment for some business unit? Have you communicated with the stakeholders your plans to upgrade? Are they involved in this decision, hopefully? Are you going to run concurrent with both environments for some period of time? Well, what about your URLs? That's one where I noticed inside of Microsoft what they'll do is that central portal, the MSW portal, seems like every other version, it goes from MSW to MSWeb and then back to MSW. So they're doing fancy things with the URLs to get around. You want to see a beta of what we're doing here, then you can click on this link and you can see the new version. And so essentially it kind of is treated as this other environment is a pilot, as we're running production with this older version, or the supported RTM version. So it gives you an opportunity to give people a sneak peek at what's going on. You might want to control more of that environment. A lot of those sandbox and pilot environments turn into production, so you need to be careful about what happens in those environments at the same time. Planning to revisit look and feel, right? That's another time where it's like, oh, we hired someone to build our master pages. Well, how are you going to loop them back in? Or are you planning on touching your look and feel as you move forward? Pre-upgrade checker. This is the drum roll. This tool is really going to change even the way you administer SharePoint, I believe. This is essentially, think of this as a bunch of rules for a best practices engine. And essentially that's what it is. But these rules are the best rules that we've ever seen. And the reports that come out of it are really, really good. High level, we get kind of two major buckets of information. We have reported information, like these are the servers in your environment, these are the databases, this is the size of your index, these are the SSPs you're using, this is the size of your content across all your web applications. These are your site definitions, and here's the ones that are missing. These are the features, and these are the features that are missing. These are your dependencies of language packs, and on and on and on. Topology, WSS search topologies. And it not only gives you all this information, but it actually identifies current and potential issues, like orphan site collections, orphan lists. As well, we've got that fix-up tool for variations. That's another time where you should be looking at how can we fix up these variations where they've kind of been orphaned off, or the connections are no longer good. Camel-based views, camel-based content types, modified content databases. Essentially, missing features is a really an important one, where it'll actually tell you how many site collections are based on a feature that's no longer there. How many sites, or site collections, I should say, are based on site definitions, where the definitions are custom and there's no config that it's based on. Now, as well, there's a couple of different ways to run this pre-upgrade check command. And this command is actually an operation in STS-ADM, the command line interface. And there's a local server only, where you can say, by default, it actually runs against the whole farm. You run the command and it'll give you results for your whole farm. But I think you should not overlook this local server only option. This local server only option allows you to run it on one server and then run it on another server. And then you get the XML results on both of them, and you can compare those. Or get your developers involved in comparing those two XML files. Otherwise, you get two reports, and you could still run, say, a WinDiff against those two reports to identify, highlight the areas where they're different. And this is another kind of critical thing to understand is pre-scan, the previous version of the upgrade checker, the one for going from 2003 to 2007, it used to flip a bit. It was really designed around preparing your environment to upgrade. And I really say this pre-upgrade checker, it's more of a best practices analyzer. It's more of an analyzer to make sure that you're ready, that your data is ready to be upgraded, and that you know how well your environment is documented. So rather than thinking of the pre-upgrade checker as something you run once before you upgrade, you really should think about this as something you run as soon as possible to get all this stuff identified early so you can address all these things. And as you're addressing these things, you run it again, and then run it again, and run it again. And why would I say you need to run it multiple times? You see that AAM? One of the most common calls that support desk receives is around alternate access mappings. Alternate access mappings are actually documented when you run the tool. It gives you your servers, it gives you your databases, and it gives you your alternate access mappings written out. And it's really, really good information. So you're running the pre-upgrade check. Well, STS-ADM-help will give you the output of the operation pre-upgrade check. Now there's these rules files. And you see there's a couple of different options there. You can list the rules files, or you can specify an individual rules file. Really, you don't need to worry so much about the rules file for most environments. Essentially, what you'll find is when you're running this thing, there's these rules files. You put the rules files in this directory. Most people aren't going to write custom rules, so you can ignore those two things. Really, it's around local only, or you'd run just stsadm-o pre-upgrade check, and that'll give you for the whole server. And here's an example of what it looks like. Hopefully that's not too hard to see, but essentially you can see all that stuff in yellow is just information. It's documenting your environment, and those pass are pass or fail type of things, where it's telling you, do you have the right operating system? Do you have any orphaned sites? Are you missing anything in the web config, and so on. So first time you run that, it may look exactly like that, or it might look like this, where when you run it, boom, you're seeing that, oh, we're missing some site definition, configuration information, so it looks like we're missing a site definition, or we're missing a feature. I've actually put together a blog on these two scans with the information that comes from those, and I'd recommend that you check out as you run them, looking at those. But as well, now look at this. At the very bottom of that command, we see operation completed successfully. Don't be fooled that because it ran successfully, that it means you're ready to upgrade. Definitely wrong. This one, it obviously doesn't have the right operating system. It's not 64-bit, or it's not Windows Server 2008. And it's missing some features, and it's missing some site definitions. So don't be fooled that you're ready to go because this has come back with operation completed successfully. That's what it always says. And as well, you can kind of see here, review the results at, and then it gives you an HTML file. Well, if we had more time, I'd actually run through that HTML file, but we're not going to get a chance to do that. But I have included that HTML on my blog. And as well, the results come out in XML. There's an HTML. And don't ignore that log file. That log file is actually really good. It includes all sorts of information about what rules were run and gives you database results. So like this database had these problems, this database had these problems, and all that information is in the log. So don't ignore the log either. It actually includes a lot of good info. So here's kind of a quick list of reference of what it includes in there as well. When you actually run it against your environment, the pre-upgrade check, you'll get all information. Now, one thing is, if you're saying, oh, it doesn't show any large lists on mine, and I don't even have a section included for that. If it runs and there's no results for one of its rules, it won't create a section for it. So you may find that when you run it against one farm or another farm, you kind of get little different results. If you look at your log, you'll see the rules were run, but if it has your results, it won't include it in your report. Like I mentioned, that report includes kind of two major buckets, the information and configuration stuff, and then customizations and dependencies, whether they're listed or missing, the language packs, and so on. So this is kind of more as a reference for you. But important to understand that getting that stuff documented is really going to put you further ahead. And you can actually compare this. If you have been documented, you can compare these against your logs. Now here is just kind of an example of what that HTML file looks like. Obviously, we're not going to get time to drill into that so much here. I did a little bit of that in the blog, but highly recommend that you walk through there. It gives you a lot of insight into your environment. Now, Service Pack 2 also included some options that are going to help us in the future. As an example, read-only databases came in there. There's a little bit of write-up there with a link to the TechNet article on how the read-only thing works in Service Pack 2. But essentially that can mitigate downtime, whether it's build-to-build upgrades from now on in our 2007 environment or for the future. So those read-only databases are going to give us more options. Another one that came in there was parallel content database upgrades. I wasn't able to find too much information online about that, but it's another something to look forward to, where we'll hear more about that as things move along. The enum webs is one that actually will give you enum all webs, I should say. Enum all webs will actually give you the whole structure of your environment. Really cool stuff, and it gives you the GUID of those sites. You can actually point it to a specific database, and it'll give you the structure of your environment from the web application on down. So it'll give you kind of a nice XML-based overview of all your sites and site collections. So you don't have to run enum sites and then enum webs and try and piece the whole thing together. This one gives you a nice structure. And I actually put these two together because the variations fix-up tool, some of the information it needs is what comes from that enum all webs command. Delete site, there's a new parameter in there, the force. So if you've got orphans, you can now use the delete site with the force command with the GUID, so you can get the GUIDs from that enum all webs as well, where you're trying to force delete of a site or a web. So those are two new commands that now give us a force, so we can actually clean things up a little bit better. Good stuff. Now, a little bit of insight here. There's in the sneak peek videos, there's a little bit on visual upgrade. I highly recommend you go check that out. But as well, in the pre-upgrade check report, it talks about supported upgrade methods of in-place and database attach, and we'll hear much more about that as we move along. More thoughts on dev assets and customizations when you start scanning and looking for things, walking through this list or trying to identify all of your customizations. What about your logs? Your logs, when you run, there's that HTML report, the XML summary, and the log file that comes out of that. Anytime you do an upgrade, there's logs that come out, and I highly recommend people keep track of those logs. There's a path there to where you can find those logs. You get your worker process logs. There's the event viewer where there might be things that are firing as well, whether it's your system logs or application logs. Kind of winding things down, next steps. I've kind of alluded to this earlier on. I highly recommend everyone create a copy of their environment, and the best way to do that is to create a Hyper-V, Windows Server 2008, 64-bit copy of your environment. So you want to create an image with all of your customizations, including Service Pack 2. As soon as you've got that, then you can run the pre-upgrade check on that Hyper-V environment. Now, can you run pre-upgrade check on your production environment now? Yeah, sure.